occurred at great expense in relationship to the British Empire's function.
Yes.
So maybe you could just walk through that a bit and we could delve into that.
Yes. I mean, this is a particularly important one because, yes, first of all, as you well know, many of the people like William Wilberforce who are most prominent in arguing the case for the abolition of slavery were driven comprehensively by their Christian faith. And so, as my late friend Rabbi Jonathan Sachs used to say, that the claim that morality is self-evident is self-evidently untrue. These people were driven by a specific idea of morality and a specific set of values and indeed virtues. And it's a modern myth that we would have got there anyway. But the sanctity of the individual life and the autonomy of every individual, the necessity of every individual having autonomy was at the absolute base of the desire, first of all, to ban slavery in the British Empire. And then, and it was maybe people would say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you, Douglas, having been born and brought up in the UK, but a pretty remarkable thing that the British Empire then decided to spend a considerable amount of blood and treasure policing the high seas in order to stop slavery elsewhere. British sailors losing their lives, boarding ships without sails that they would search the cargo holds for and discover were, for instance, a Brazilian slave trading ship trying to sneak through in disguise, because of course Brazil didn't get rid of slavery until the 1880s formally. And Britain policed the seas for this for many years. Thousands of sailors lost their lives, and in the end, as I cite in the book, the actual cost of eradicating the slave trade has been shown by a number of modern historians to have actually cost Britain more, first of all, in the actual endeavor, secondly, most importantly, in the paying out, the buying out effectively of companies engaged in the slave trade in order to make sure that they didn't continue their trade. And thirdly, in the increased prices that everybody in Britain had to pay throughout the 19th century because of the need to pay for goods that were coming from non-slave trading places. These ended up being an exercise more costly than the benefits accrued during the period of slavery. So the reason why I mention this isn't actually just because of the way I speak or the fact that I happen to come from the UK. It's because it then gets us to this very interesting question, which is, what would restitution ever look like? And what I notice, and what I, as you know, Jordan, in a number of times in the book go into, is this question of reparations, as it's currently called. What one might also call a sort of, what would restitution look like on a number of historic wrongs? And I've been very struck in the last 2 decades in particular by the fact that we have people, and again, Nietzsche puts his finger on it with uncanny precision. I'm struck by the number of people who rip at long closed wounds, rip them open, and then scream at everyone about how hurt they are. Because in actual fact, on a whole range of issues of what we're now reminded are historic wrongs, something like considerable restitution happened an awfully long time ago. I mean, you still hear people saying, it's extremely popular in American discourse, that America never addressed the issue of slavery. And, you sort of think, well, fighting a long and bloody civil war about it would have been one obvious way that they've clearly tried to address it. And even that today is poo-pooed. A number of contemporary historians say, oh, it wasn't really about slavery, it was a different power struggle. It never is about the thing that the thing was about. But I'm very keen to address these ugly, difficult corners of it. So I say, if you are interested in restitution, of making atonement for any wrongs in the past, you have to look at what actually has already happened in the past by way of atonement.
Well, there's also a Christian/Western or Judeo-Christian/Western philosophy of atonement, and that is that you atone for your shortcomings and perhaps for the unequal distribution of talents by trying to live a responsible, generous, productive, and honest life. And that it's actually a matter of individual moral striving rather than something that should be conceptualized at the group level. And so I'm struck again, and still, I cannot understand, if you accept the notion that the willingness of one group to oppress another is in some measure a human universal, it's deeply characteristic of our history, and that the reason that that's wrong is that individuals shouldn't be subject to arbitrary compulsion, partly because it deprives the rest of us of their potential value as free agents, and partly because it's that, and partly because it transgresses against part of their essential nature that's intrinsically valuable. You can't oppose slavery on moral grounds, as far as I can tell, without implicitly accepting those axioms. And so then it's so striking to me that the people who are simultaneously accusing the West of these uniquely awful predilections accept one of the great propositions of the West as central to their entire moral doctrine, and then they accept it so centrally they don't even notice that it's true. They just think it's self-evident. Well, it's not so self-evident. Why shouldn't I oppress someone if I can get away with it? And why shouldn't my group?
Right. And then we have the one now, which is the form of oppression that presents itself in the guise of the victim. I constantly come back in this book to the people who present themselves as victims and are clearly the bullies. People who claim to be suffering from historic wrongs because it gives them a dominance that they would not otherwise have. I mean, let me give you two quick but quite significant examples of this. Two of the most celebrated writers of the last generation in America are Ta-Nehisi Coates and Ibram X. Kendi. Both of them have been recipients of MacArthur Genius Awards. Kendi is now the only holder, apart from the late Elie Wiesel, the late Nobel Prize winner and Holocaust survivor, of one of the most prestigious chairs in an American Ivy League university. Both of them have written memoirs that have been bestsellers and are highly feted and cited everywhere. And both of them have an origin story of racism that is absolutely risible. In the case of Coates, he describes a moment in one of his memoirs of getting into an elevator with his young child, and a white woman gets into the elevator and he says behaves dismissively towards the child. And Coates describes how he wants to sort of fling this woman against the wall and sort of throttle her for this act of racism. And at no point suggests that